Hey everybody, I'm Chef Tom with allthingsbbq.com, and this is Texas Style Brisket. Now there are a lot of ways to cook a brisket, and I have and will try just about any of them, but arguably one of the best ways to cook a brisket is in the style of the Texans. Now, I'm a sucker for big, savory, beefy flavors, so when we start to talk about a brisket flavor profile that consists of little more than salt, pepper, smoke, and beef, I'm all in. Now, the beauty of the Texas Style Brisket lies in its simplicity and the opportunity that affords you to cook these briskets for years to come, constantly growing and improving upon your techniques. So the first thing we're gonna do today is fire up the pit. And we got up early this morning, so I'm gonna throw you back to about 5 a.m. before the sun was even up when we lit the fire in the smoker. Today we're cooking on the Yoder Smoker's loaded Wichita offset smoker. So we're gonna get started with a chimney full of lumped charcoal, and this is gonna really be our heat base. This is our coal bed that we can start to roll sticks of oak wood on top of for the smoke. So we'll just get some fire starters lit up down here and place our chimney full of lumped charcoal using the Kamado Joe Big Block today, right on top. All right, charcoal is hot to the top of the chimney, so we're gonna dump this in the back half of our firebox. And we're kinda gonna keep this fire isolated to the back half of our firebox so we can burn a really hot, intense fire, but a small fire so that we don't get our temperature out of control. We'll start with a couple of splits of oak wood on our charcoal. I'm gonna put one right here in front where it's going to warm up. That way, as soon as we roll this over here in a little bit, instant combustion, no acrid smoke. All right, guys, our pit's come up to 250 degrees and kind of stabilized there, so we're gonna go ahead and get our brisket on at this point. We're gonna start this one kind of on the left side here, as we've got a second one going on later, but we are gonna go point in toward the fire, generally speaking, just because that's a little bit larger mass of meat than the flat end. Got a pretty good base going here. Don't really need any wood yet, but once this starts to burn down, we're just gonna roll over a stick of wood. Look how instantly that ignites because it's been hanging out in there getting hot. Once we're ready to roll this over, it's gonna be ready to combust for sure. But we're just gonna do our best to kind of predict the future so that we can keep our temperature right around 250 degrees. We'll roll this over as these burn down. So our early brisket's been on for just a little over an hour now. We've touched on fire management just a little bit. Before this video is over, I'm gonna walk you through the trimming process, seasoning, smoking, wrapping, and slicing your Texas style brisket. So at this point, what we wanna do is go ahead and trim out our brisket. Now, let me preface this by saying that no matter how traditional a style of cooking you're doing, there's always gonna be folks with different techniques and different methods, and that's a great thing. So while I'm gonna show you how I trim out a brisket for Texas style brisket today, my expectation is that you'll take something away from that and go on to educate and experiment and find what works best for you. Now, before we even slice into this thing, I wanna talk a little bit about meat selection. What we're working with here is a Creekstone Farms prime grade Black Angus whole brisket, and this is my go-to brisket. But whatever you end up with, I highly recommend reaching for that prime grade. Now, prime grade only makes up about 2% of all beef production, so that's why it's a little bit pricier. But the way they determine that prime grade is off of the intramuscular fat, the marbling, all of that good stuff, the tenderness. It's gonna lead you to a juicier slice of brisket in the end, and that's what we want. Now below that, you've got choice grade, and I've cooked plenty of great briskets that were choice grade. But choice makes up about 50% of all beef production, which is a pretty wide window, and that means it can be pretty hit or miss. Below that, you've got select, and then some other stuff that we're not even gonna talk about because it's not worth considering. When it gets to that low of a grade, that means there's not much fat in there, which means it's probably gonna dry out on you. Just stay away from it. So the other thing to consider with your brisket is putting a little age on it. And when I say age, I don't mean dry aging, I mean wet aging. This is the aging that happens inside a sealed cryovac under refrigeration. Now this brisket's been wet aging for about 30 days. I find that 30 to 40 days is pretty ideal. And what it gets you is a nice tender brisket. You see the way this thing is moving now? A month ago it was stiff as a board, but the enzymes that are already inside here they've started to break down and tenderize the meat, which gives you a head start on a tender piece of brisket. So let's get acquainted with our whole brisket here. We have the fat side up right now, which means the point muscle is sitting on top. The flat muscle or the lean is sitting underneath. So that's your lean and that's your fatty, and there's a layer of fat that separates the two of them. This meat side here, you're gonna see this big old hunk of fat. It's part of that decal that runs through the middle of the brisket. We definitely are going to take this out of here because that big old thick piece of fat just cannot render down during this whole cook. So there's kind of a seam here. It naturally wants to come apart a little bit. You just got to help it along with your knife to peel that out of there. And then go ahead and make a cut to remove it. But as you'll see, all fat. No need to keep that attached. It's just not going to be able to render down in time, so save it for sausage making. So that's an easy place to start, but one of the first things that I like to do is just take off the gray edge of the brisket here. This is also going to give me a good look. I'm not going to take off a lot. We certainly don't want to waste it, but this gives me a good look at the profile of the brisket. And you can see here now how that lean meat sits on the bottom, and this is the beginning of that fatty point that we get the burnt ends out of that sits on top. And that's helpful because it can help you determine just how much fat to trim off of here. So we get a good profile that way. I'm going to do the same thing right over here. The other thing you've got to consider is how this kind of sticks up, this area of the point that it's become known as the mohawk, and it sticks up because of this wedge of fat that's right here in between these two muscles. That's something we want to dig out as well. Now this edge of that point meat, it's just going to turn into crusty bits, so we're going to make this a little more aerodynamic by taking that down just a little bit, and then we're going to work our way into this fat. Kind of at an angle, going to come down, and then before you get to that flat meat down here, we'll angle back out and pull that off. Again, kind of naturally wants to come off of there. That's all fat, and again, does not render down super well during the cook. So if you want to get some nice bark in this area and actually have some thinner rendered fat, it's a good idea to go ahead and take it off and then shape this up accordingly. So from here, we're going to trim down the fat cap a bit with the goal of getting about 1/4 inch of fat, especially over our lean meat here. You know, historically, I've been kind of go either way on the fat on top of the point meat. The point meat's got so much intramuscular fat that it really doesn't need any fat on top of it. That's not going to help moisturize that meat. It's going to be plenty juicy on its own, but the simple, I don't know, presence of fat on the outside of a slice is really pleasant to me when you bite into it. So I'm gonna leave a thin layer of fat over the point meat as well. And certainly every brisket is different. You'll get more comfortable with this process the more you do this. But even after trimming hundreds or thousands of them, you're gonna find yourself scalping into that meat just a little bit. No big deal, you can't do anything about it. Just go ahead and move on. It gives you a good idea of where that meat is down there anyway. But anywhere you feel a little bit harder fat, like back here on this corner, I'm gonna go ahead and take that off. So this is what I was talking about with that side profile. You can kind of see just how much fat's sitting on top. So I know that we can take off just a little bit more, shave a little bit down right here. Try and keep that pretty even. And again, in the end, we're gonna shape this up to make it just a little bit more aerodynamic so nothing's sticking out and getting burnt during the process. To be honest, you can do as much or as little of this type of trimming as you like. If you want to keep it simple, you certainly can just open this thing up and cut off the hard fat and get to it. But another thing that I find to be really helpful is this hunk of wedge of fat that's in between this point and flat. When that point comes down, there's a big wedge of it right here at the edge. We're going to go ahead and take that off as well, and then just kind of level this out. Again, smooth lines, aerodynamic, nothing sticking out to get burnt. All right, so I feel good about the top of the brisket now, but one thing to consider here is we look back at the back side of this brisket where the point sits. That's a lot of thick meat. We work down to this front edge of the flat. That's super thin. I mean, that's just gonna burn up, turn crunchy. It's not gonna end up being a very good piece or slice of brisket, so we're just gonna go ahead, trim that corner off where it's a little bit too thin. And to kind of even everything out, keep things aerodynamic, we'll just take a little bit off this corner as well, and then, shape these edges. Again, do as much or as little of this as you like. As far as a home cook goes, it's not like you're presenting this to a judge. We're just trying to get the best possible results. So we've got that big wedge of fat out right off the bat. Here on the meat side, the opposite side, the bottom side, what I would call the bottom side of our brisket. We're just gonna make sure, again, kind of making this a little bit aerodynamic so that none of this stuff's gonna burn up during the cook. Round that out a little bit, nice and smooth. Over here, we've got some of that big hard fat left. We'll shape that just a little bit as well. Don't want any little stringy bits hanging off. So once you feel good about the shape, we're gonna move on to taking this fat off of the surface. Now this is, again, for appearance sake. You can take off this silver skin, which doesn't do a great job of rendering down. Or, again, stop messing around with your knife and just move on to seasoning. I'm not good at that part. I like to tinker. So when you're happy with the trim, you can move on to the seasoning. Texas style brisket typically means little to nothing more than salt and pepper. Today we're using the brisket rub that I designed for Cattleman's Grill called Lone Star Brisket Rub. And I can tell you, since I developed this myself, that it's primarily salt and pepper, equal parts by weight, which comes out closer to about 2 parts pepper to 1 part salt if you're doing it by volume. And then I went a little bit above and beyond, added some roasted garlic and celery seed. But for the most part, what you're gonna get is that pretty Dalmatian color across your brisket from the salt and pepper. So I'm gonna add just a little bit of binder in the form of beef tallow today. We're gonna be using tallow later in the wrap as well, so might as well get a little head start here. That thin layer is gonna help our rub stick just a little bit. So big old piece of meat here. We're gonna make sure that it's generously seasoned. So nice coarse bits of kosher salt and black pepper in here, and then you can see a little bit of that garlic. This is really gonna help with the development of the bark. Go ahead and hit the bottom side now. We'll flip it back over and touch up the top before we get this onto the smoker. All right, so let's just press that in to help it start to adhere to the meat. All right, pretty up this presentation side. We'll let it soak into the meat for the next 10 minutes or so. Make sure it's really attached and not looking too dry on the surface before we transfer this to the smoker. All right, so onto the smoker. I'm gonna put this point in toward the firebox where the heat's a little more intense. It's a little bit denser and fattier, so it can kind of handle that, especially with the intramuscular fat. You don't get that so much in the flat here. You can see our brisket that went on 2.5 hours ago, sitting at about, internal temperature is at 118 right now. Just starting to develop a little bit of crust and bark and color. Still in the early stages of that for sure. And a little cream cheese hanging out here in front for some Texas Twinkies that you guys will be seeing pretty soon. All right, guys, we are about 7.5 hours into this cook, and I know that seems like a long time with no updates, but the truth is there's been nothing to update because this has just been sitting and smoking the whole time. We haven't been doing any spritzing. Our corners are nice and smooth, not too dried out or anything, so there's no need to really try and spritz here. Internal temperatures in the 170s right now. The bark's looking pretty dang nice. You're starting to get a nice little bit of jiggle out of this. We are going to wrap this in butcher paper, and I feel like we're really close. I just want a touch more color before we do that. So just wanted to give you this update, and we'll go ahead and roll another log over on the fire. All right, so breaking this down a little bit so we can roll over the next hot log. Trying to keep that a little bit elevated so there's air movement around. You get complete instant combustion on there. We'll throw another log in to warm up. All right, guys, well, we're about 8.5 hours into this cook now. We're temping in the 180s at this point, but more importantly, oh my gosh, look at that. Look at that beautiful fat just rendering down. Great bark formed, love the color. At this point, we're gonna get this wrapped up in some butcher paper. All right, so we're going down on double sheets of butcher paper for the wrap. We're gonna slap down a little bit of beef tallow here inside the wrap. Adding beef tallow is a fantastic way to keep that super juicy. That fat's gonna carry all that flavor. Let's set this right on top of here. We'll slather a little more on top. Oh yeah, just work that into that crusty rub. Come around the top once. Try and keep this nice and tight. Fold in the sides. Keep rolling. And we got a little bit more paper than we need here, so I'm just gonna take some of that off. Tuck that excess underneath. All right, so we're upright again now. We've got the point on top, the flat on bottom, back onto the smoker to finish cooking. All right, so point end by the fire once again. Stick a probe in here just to keep track of where that temperature's trucking along. And now with this butcher paper, that'll kind of expedite this cooking process, trap some of those juices in there. All right, so to finish this thing out, we can go just a little bit hotter, maybe like a 275, 300 range. And we'll keep on rolling those splits over. Well, our early brisket has been on for 10.5 hours now. Our probe is showing us that it's reading around 206, 208 internal temperature. It's feeling really nice, so I want to open this up and let you guys have a look at it. All right, so we're going to take this over to the table to check it out. Before we do that, you can also take a peek here at our later brisket. It is now about ready to wrap after 8.5, 9 hours of smoking. God, that looks nice. All right, let's open it up. Paper soaked in tallow. That's a good sign. Oh my gosh, this smells incredible. Wow. Look at that jiggle. We lost a little bit of our bark on that wrap. It's gonna happen. Man, looks really nice. Smells awesome. That's just butter. Let's come down here. That's that point up there. Down here is our flat, which is a little bit of a thick flat on this brisket. And we are temping, like I said, like 206, 208. Got a 207 dead right there. So, with a little time to rest, this is going to continue to kind of come up. All these juices are going to redistribute, and then we'll be ready to slice into this. All right, I'm just going to give it a fresh wrap for the rest and put a little bit, just a little bit more tallow down, and make sure that nothing's going to dry out. If it's covered in fat, it's not going to be dry. So we kind of let some of that initial heat out by opening up this package, which is not a bad thing. It's gonna give us a bit of a temperature drop to start this resting process. So I'm actually just gonna let this sit out. It's about 95 degrees outside right now. I'm gonna let it sit out for the next 30 to 60 minutes, and then we'll transfer it to a cooler to rest for even longer. It's been a little more than 2 hours since we started resting this brisket, and I really wish we could go longer, but for the sake of time, we're gonna wrap this thing up. And because of that, we never did get to resting in a cooler. But if you've got time, go ahead and do it. Give it 4 hours, give it 6 hours. It's gonna stay warm in there. So we left this out, just kind of room temperature, ambient temperature. Let the temperature drop. It's in the 150s now, which you can see here on the fireboard. And that means it's cool enough to slice, but still warm enough to enjoy. Oh, wow. It's got nice and tacky on top. So we've kind of talked about the two muscles that exist here on this whole brisket. You can see this is the edge of that point meat where your burn ends come from. Down here is that flat meat where your slices come from. The muscle fibers, they run in different directions. So if we look at this the bottom side, you can see the muscle fibers running this direction, which means that we want to cut across those. But when we get to about here, we're going to want to switch that because the muscle fibers for the point meat are running like this, and we want to go this direction. So we'll just go ahead and separate these out now, starting right at the edge of where I can see that point meat is going to meet the flat, and it's just about halfway down the brisket. And there you have your point meat on top and just the very back edge of your flat or your lean. Look at that beautiful smoke ring, super juicy, beautiful red color. Yeah, this is gonna be really great. And the same way we're looking at our lean meat, this is mostly the flat with just a little bit of that fatty meat on top. Oh my gosh, guys, look at that, just dripping. Super moist. So muscle fibers are in a bit of an angle. If we want to, we could angle our cut just a little bit more, but just for the sake of taking a slice off here, let's go ahead and check this out. There you go. It's cutting like butter. Wow. That is a beautiful slice of brisket right there. Give it just a little bit of a tug. Oh yeah, comes right apart. Do one more slice out of here. Let's see how that hang is looking. Pretty good. A little bit tight with a wide slice, but not tight at all when it pops right apart. You see how that's running at kind of an angle? That's what I'm talking about, how we're not perfectly perpendicular. So if you want, if you need this to have a little slightly different texture, say you got it a little bit tough, go ahead and change that angle and cut that down even more. Slice just a little bit thinner, and you'll have no idea that it wasn't perfectly cooked. But these are all adjustments that you can make on the fly because you just never quite know what you're going to get when you slice into a brisket. You hope for the best, and you can make some adjustments to make it as delicious as possible in the end. All right, I'm gonna take this kind of mohawk mound right off the end here. That's looking pretty. You can actually take this bit of that lean off, and right there, you get some nice cubes if you wanna do like a Texas burn end. A little barky here, I'm going to switch to my scalloped. So there's your Texas burn ends. And then we can just keep right on slicing into that point meat. Got a nice bit of crust to it. Really like that. All right, so there you get a feel for that fattier, has more of the intramuscular fat. So you can see just how tender that is. And again, just like with the flat meat, a little tug comes right apart. This right here is my favorite. Oh my God. It just doesn't get much better than that in barbecue. That bite was so beefy, fatty, delicious, simply seasoned. It just feels like pure barbecue joy. I love it. All right, let's build a little plate. All right, let's get some of our point meat down here. Get your burn ends. Do some lean right here in front. Some of those slices. A lot of fattiness going on here, so I'm gonna put a couple things out just to enjoy alongside our beef. All right, so we got some pickled onion here. There's some spicy garlic dill pickles down. More onion. Just a little bit of barbecue sauce in case you want to dip. I recommend not going with something super sweet. Casey Crossroads is a savory tomato-based sauce. It's great for brisket. And then of course you might just want a little bit of white bread to mop things up with there. Let's get a little taste here. Do some of this lean. Pickle. That looks like a good bite. Oh yeah. Love the way the acidity cuts through the richness of the beef. Just a touch of sweetness from that sauce. And I'm not a sauce guy. I'd rather have it plain any day, but it's not a bad complement to the rest of these flavors going on. But yeah, for me, I can sit here and eat this point meat until I'm sick, probably. I'm hoping these guys won't let me do that today. We're gonna feed the crew too. So I'm gonna let you guys go. I wanna hear how you guys did this. Give it a try. Tell me what you think about Texas style beef versus a Kansas City style brisket. For me, I think it's a really fantastic technique, a really great cook. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to check out allthingsbbq.com for all the products featured in today's cook. If you enjoyed the recipe, hit that subscribe button. And if you have any questions or comments, or there's anything you'd like to see me cook, let me know in the comment section down below, and let's be good to one another. For more recipes, tips, and techniques, head over to allthingsbbq.com/thesauce. All things barbecue, where barbecue legends are made.